Okay, so you want to go deeper on Philippians 1:6, huh?
Right.
Not just like the Sunday school stuff.
Yeah.
You're looking for some fresh angles, for your sermons and your Bible studies.
Hmm.
Well, I think you came to the right place.
I think so too.
We got a whole stack of sermons from pastors around the country. And let me tell you,
Yeah.
there is some seriously creative thinking in here.
Yeah. It's amazing, actually. You know how a verse that we all know so well, it's so familiar, can spark so much new insight.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to the power of Scripture, how it continues to speak to us in different ways, in different seasons.
Totally. So should we just jump in?
Let's jump in.
Okay, great. So one big theme that really resonated across a lot of these sermons is this idea that God's not just starting something in us.
Yeah.
He's committed to finishing it.
Right.
And it's not a rough draft. It's like a masterpiece in progress.
Yes, and I think that's such a powerful antidote to the discouragement that we can sometimes feel in our spiritual lives. We get impatient. We want to see results now. We want to see the finished product.
Right.
But God is working on a much, much grander scale. He's got the long view in mind.
Yeah, it's not just like a vague promise either. Several pastors really brought this to life.
Yeah.
With some incredible illustrations.
Oh, yeah, the illustrations are great.
For example, one pastor, he compared God's work in us to the meticulous step-by-step creation process in Genesis.
I love that one. It's so visual.
Right.
And instead of just kind of, skimming over the creation story, he really dove into the details, like the way that God carefully and intentionally brought each element into being, how he declared it good. It just paints this beautiful picture of a God who takes immense care and delight in his creation. And if you put that much thought into the world,
right,
just imagine the level of intentionality he's bringing to our lives, to your life and to my life.
It's true. I never thought about it that way. And it really elevates our understanding of what good work even means. It's not just about us doing, good deeds. It's about God's intentional and loving creation of something beautiful and purposeful in each of us.
It really is. It's about, becoming more like Christ, reflecting his image more and more fully. And that transformation, that's the masterpiece that God is working on.
Yeah. And speaking of building something beautiful, another pastor used a really intriguing analogy. He talked about Elon Musk's first principles thinking.
Elon Musk, really?
I know what you're thinking. Like Elon Musk in a sermon.
Yeah.
But hear me out. It's actually brilliant.
Okay.
So he talked about how Musk breaks down complex problems, right? Like into their most fundamental truths,
right,
stripping away all the assumptions and distractions, and then he rebuilds solutions from that foundation.
Interesting.
So how does that apply to our spiritual lives? I mean, I thought the pastor did such a good job of this.
Well, he basically argued that we should be doing the same thing with our faith. Constantly going back to those core teachings of Jesus, stripping away, the cultural baggage, the distractions of the world, and then rebuilding our lives on that really solid foundation.
Okay, no, that's a sermon illustration I can actually use.
Right? I know. It's fresh.
It's fresh.
It's engaging. And it really speaks to this culture obsessed with innovation and disruption.
Yes.
You can practically hear people leaning forward in their seats when you bring up Elon Musk.
That's so true. But what about those times when we feel stuck, like we're not making any progress in our spiritual growth? One pastor, he had a pretty intense analogy for that. He talked about military training.
Military training. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, it was intense, yes, but also incredibly effective. Like he talked about the rigorous training that soldiers go through. And it's challenging. It pushes you to your limits, but ultimately it equips you for a greater purpose.
Okay, so you're saying when things get tough, we should remember we're being prepped for something amazing.
Exactly. And this ties into another powerful theme we saw in a lot of these sermons. God uses all circumstances to shape us, even the tough ones.
Even the tough ones.
Yeah. Yeah, one pastor even called it inverse paranoia.
Inverse paranoia. That's an interesting phrase.
I know. Instead of believing that everything is conspiring against you,
right,
you embrace the idea that everything is actually conspiring for your good.
Okay.
Like for your growth.
Wow.
I mean, talk about a perspective shift.
Yeah, that's a complete 180 right there.
I know. It's a powerful reminder that we can trust God's plan even when we don't understand it. He's weaving together this beautiful tapestry, even with threads of of hardship and pain.
And sometimes those threads, even though they look messy up close,
Right.
they make the tapestry even more beautiful when you see the whole picture.
Yeah. But here's the thing. It's not just about sitting back and letting God do his thing, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
We have a role to play in this whole transformation process. And one pastor, he really highlighted this partnership
Okay.
between divine action and human responsibility. He used the example of Jesus healing the crippled man.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic for a reason.
I know.
Yeah.
It's so simple yet so profound.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus provided the power, but the man still had to choose to get up and walk.
He had to take that step. He had to make that choice.
Right. So it's like we've got God, the master artist,
Yeah.
working on this incredible masterpiece.
Yes.
But he's inviting us to actively participate in the process.
We're not just passive observers. We're co-creators with God.
Yeah.
And to help us do that, one pastor suggested crafting a rule of life.
Ooh, rule of life. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, intentional spiritual practices that create space for God to work in us. Things like prayer, solitude, service, practices that really nourish our souls and draw us closer to God.
Wow. This is already giving me so many ideas for my next sermon series.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what really stood out to you from all these different perspectives?
You know, what struck me the most was the sheer creativity and diversity of approaches to this one verse. You know, it's a reminder that even a familiar verse, like we were saying earlier,
Right.
can spark fresh insights and inspire powerful illustrations, you know, if we're willing to dig a little deeper.
Totally. It's like we've only scratched the surface of what this verse has to offer.
Exactly.
And if we keep in mind the needs and experiences of our audience, you know, like just like these pastors did, we can find ways to make these ancient truths relevant and engaging for people today.
Absolutely. And that's what it's all about.
That's what it's about.
All right.
Connecting with people where they are.
So let's keep digging.
Let's do it. In part 2, we're going to be exploring some of the more nuanced interpretations of Philippians 1:6 that we found in these sermons.
I can't wait.
Yeah, I think you're going to really like this.
Okay, great.
There's some really fascinating stuff in there. We're going to be looking at the Greek word for good work and its connection to the creation account in Genesis. And we'll also be diving into the eternal perspective of God's work in us and how that impacts our lives today.
That sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited. All right, so we'll be right back.
Sounds good. All right, so are you ready to go even deeper into Philippians 1:6?
Let's do it.
We're talking fresh perspectives, sermon-worthy illustrations, the kind of stuff that makes your congregation go, whoa.
I'm always up for some new sermon inspiration.
Okay, great.
What fascinating nuggets did you find in these sermons?
Well, one pastor really blew me away with his deep dive into the Greek word for good work in Philippians 1:6. It's not just any kind of work. It's a work that is inherently good.
Yeah.
And purposeful,
Okay.
a work that reflects the very character of God.
Hold on. Remind me. We're talking to, other pastors,
Yeah.
Bible study leaders here,
That's
right?
right, yeah.
So going into the Greek, that's not exactly a new concept.
Right.
What made this pastor's take so unique?
It was the connection he made to the creation account in Genesis.
Okay.
He argued that the same Greek word used for God's good work in Philippians 1:6 is also used to describe God's creation of the world.
Wow. You know what? I never noticed that before.
It's amazing.
It's like God is saying, just like I created the world with intention and purpose, I'm doing the same thing in your life.
Exactly. And it really elevates our understanding of God's work in us. You know, it's not just about fixing our flaws or making us better people. It's about creating something beautiful and new, something that reflects his glory.
That's a powerful message, especially, I think, for those who might be struggling with their sense of worth or purpose.
Absolutely. And speaking of struggles, another pastor offered a really thought-provoking interpretation of Philippians 1:6 in the context of suffering.
Okay.
You know, he argued that even though the verse talks about God completing a good work in us, that doesn't mean life will always be easy or pleasant.
So it's not like some prosperity gospel, name it and claim it kind of promise.
No, not at all. This pastor pointed out that the Apostle Paul, who wrote Philippians, you know, he experienced immense persecution and hardships.
Right.
Yet he still wrote with confidence about God's work being completed in him.
Interesting. So how did this pastor reconcile that? that seeming contradiction?
Well, he emphasized that God often uses hardship and trials to shape us, to refine our character.
Okay.
Think about it this way. A lump of coal, needs intense heat and pressure to become a diamond.
That's a good analogy. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if we're following God, everything should be smooth sailing.
Yeah.
But that's not always the reality, is it?
No. But even in those difficult seasons, we can hold on to the promise of Philippians 1:6. God is still at work, even when we can't see it or understand it.
I think a lot of pastors struggle with how to preach on suffering. It's a sensitive topic.
It is.
And it's easy to fall into cliches or offer simplistic solutions.
Yeah, I agree.
But this pastor's approach was really insightful. He didn't shy away from the reality of suffering, but he also offered a message of hope, rooted in the confidence that God is using even those painful experiences for our ultimate good.
That's right.
Okay, so we've talked about God's commitment to completing the good work He started in us. But what about those times when we feel stuck,
Yeah.
or like we're not making any progress?
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. That's a common struggle. And one that several of the pastors addressed in their sermons. One pastor talked about the need to actively participate in our own transformation.
Okay.
He used the example of Jesus healing the crippled man. Jesus provided the power, but the man still had to choose to get up and walk.
So it's not just about passively waiting for God to do everything. We have a role to play.
Exactly. This pastor emphasized the importance of spiritual disciplines, things like prayer, Bible study, fellowship with other believers, practices that create space for God to work in us and help us grow in our faith.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like we're partnering with God in this transformative process. He provides the power and the guidance, but we have to respond with obedience and intentionality.
Precisely. And he even suggested crafting a rule of life,
Okay.
which is a personalized set of practices tailored to our individual needs and circumstances.
Rule of life. Now that's a phrase I haven't heard in a while. Can you unpack that a bit more?
Sure. It's an ancient Christian practice that involves intentionally structuring your life around certain spiritual disciplines. It might include things like daily prayer, regular Bible reading, fasting, acts of service, or even, silence and solitude.
I can see how that would be so helpful, especially in today's world, you know, with so many distractions pulling us in every direction.
Absolutely. It's about creating space for God to work in us, to shape and mold us into the people He's calling us to be.
It's interesting. We've been talking about some pretty deep theological concepts here.
Yeah, we have.
But it all boils down to practical application in our daily lives.
That's what makes these sermons so valuable.
Yeah.
They take these grand theological ideas and make them relevant for everyday life.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground already, from the Greek word for good work to the role of suffering in our spiritual growth to the importance of spiritual disciplines. What other gems did you uncover in these sermons?
One thing that really resonated with me was how several pastors emphasized the eternal perspective of God's work in us.
Oh, the eternal perspective.
Yeah.
So it's not just about reaching a certain level of spiritual maturity in this life.
Right. Yeah, one pastor, he pointed out that Philippians 1:6, it doesn't just promise that God will complete His work in us someday. It assures us that He will complete it, and that this completion ultimately culminates on the day, we meet Christ face to face.
Wow. That's a powerful reminder, especially when we get so caught up in the day-to-day struggles of ministry and discipleship.
Absolutely. It's so easy to get discouraged, when we don't see those immediate results, or when we feel like we're constantly falling short.
Right. But knowing that God is working on a much grander scale, He's got eternity in mind. I mean, that changes everything.
It really does. It frees us to focus on faithfulness. Just taking that next step in our journey with Him, trusting that He's got the big picture in mind.
It's like we're part of this epic cosmic story.
Yeah.
And even though we only get to see a small snippet of it, our role is still significant.
And that brings us to another fascinating insight we found in these sermons.
Okay.
The idea that God's work in us is not just for our own benefit,
Okay.
but also for the good of others.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. It's not just about personal piety,
Yeah.
or escaping to heaven someday. It's about becoming vessels of God's grace and love in the world.
Exactly. One pastor, he used this brilliant analogy of a stained glass window.
Yeah.
Each piece of glass is beautiful on its own, but when they're all put together, they create this stunning work of art that reflects the light in a unique and breathtaking way.
So each of us, as God transforms us, is becoming part of something much bigger
Yeah.
and more beautiful than ourselves.
That's the idea. And as we reflect God's light more and more brightly, we illuminate the world around us,
Yeah.
drawing others to his love and grace.
Now that's an image that's sure to stick with people.
It's powerful, isn't it? And it reminds us that God's work in us has a ripple effect. It extends far beyond our own lives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Philippians 1:10, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think the most important thing is the reminder that God is not only faithful to complete the good work he started in us, but that this work is inherently good, purposeful, and extends beyond our earthly lives. It's a promise we can cling to, in times of doubt and discouragement, a source of hope and inspiration as we seek to grow in our faith, and a call to participate in God's transformative work in the world.
Beautifully said. And for all of you listening out there, I hope this deep dive has sparked some fresh ideas for you and given you a renewed sense of confidence in God's work in your own lives and ministry. So go out there and share this good news. Remember, the masterpiece that God is creating in you is not just for your own benefit. It's meant to be shared with the world.